The gymnasium fell silent as General Marcus Hayes stepped onto the polished floor, his combat boots echoing against the walls lined with recruits. Sarah Chen stood among them, her military uniform crisp, despite the grueling morning drills. Dear 24, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled pilots in her squadron. But today felt different. Today, the entire base buzzed with whispers about a classified mission that would change everything. The general's weathered face showed no emotion as his eyes scanned the rows of soldiers. Sarah had heard stories about this man, how he had led impossible missions in hostile territories, how he never left anyone behind, and how he could spot talent from across a crowded room. His presence commanded respect without him saying a word. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of military service, "what I'm about to tell you will not leave this room. We have a situation that requires our best and brightest." Sarah's heart raced. She had been preparing for this moment her entire military career, though she never imagined it would come so soon. The mission briefing revealed a hostage situation in a remote compound overseas. Intelligence suggested that a group of international aid workers, including American citizens, were being held by heavily armed militants. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, making traditional rescue operations nearly impossible. This was where the military's most elite pilots would come in. Sarah listened intently as the general explained the terrain challenges, the weather conditions, and the tight timeline they faced. She had trained for situations like this, spending countless hours in flight simulators and practicing precision maneuvers that most pilots only dreamed of attempting. Her instructors had always told her she had a natural gift for flying, an instinct that couldn't be taught. As the briefing continued, Sarah noticed how the general's eyes occasionally landed on her. There was something in his gaze that suggested he was evaluating each person in the room, weighing their capabilities against the enormous task ahead. She straightened her shoulders and maintained eye contact, refusing to show any sign of doubt or weakness. The other pilots in the room were equally impressive. There was Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had flown rescue missions in 3 different war zones. Captain Thompson had earned medals for his precision flying in dangerous conditions. Staff Sergeant Williams was known for her ability to navigate through the worst weather imaginable. Each person present represented years of training and experience, but Sarah knew she brought something unique to the table. During her previous deployments, she had developed an uncanny ability to remain calm under pressure. When other pilots panicked, she found clarity. When situations seemed hopeless, she discovered solutions that others missed. Her fellow pilots had started calling her the Ghost because of how she could appear and disappear from radar signatures during training exercises. The general continued his briefing, explaining that this mission would require split-second timing and absolute precision. There would be no room for error, no second chances. The lives of innocent people hung in the balance, and failure was not an option. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that always preceded her best performances. As the formal briefing concluded, the general announced that he would be conducting individual interviews with each pilot. This was standard procedure for high-stakes missions, but Sarah sensed something more was happening. The way the general had studied each face during the briefing suggested he was looking for something specific, some quality that went beyond technical skill. Sarah's mind raced through everything she knew about General Hayes. He was legendary for his ability to read people, to see potential that others might miss. Stories circulated about how he had handpicked unknown soldiers who went on to become heroes. If he was taking personal interest in pilot selection, this mission was even more critical than she had initially understood. The gymnasium began to empty as pilots filed out to wait for their individual interviews. Sarah remained standing at attention, watching as the general spoke quietly with his aide-de-camp. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she noticed how the general's expression had grown more serious, more focused. Lieutenant Rodriguez was called first for his interview. Sarah watched him walk confidently toward the small office that had been set up at the far end of the gymnasium. She tried to read the general's body language as Rodriguez disappeared inside, but the older man's face remained impassive. While waiting, Sarah reflected on her journey to this moment. She had grown up in a military family watching her father return from deployments with stories that inspired her to serve. Her mother had worried about Sarah following the same path, but she knew from a young age that flying was her calling. The rigorous training, the constant evaluation, the pressure to prove herself in a male-dominated field, all of it had led to this gymnasium, this mission, this chance to make a real difference. The interview with Rodriguez lasted exactly 15 minutes. Sarah watched as he emerged from the office, his expression unreadable. He nodded respectfully to the general before leaving the gymnasium entirely. Captain Thompson was called next, then Staff Sergeant Williams. Each interview followed the same pattern: 15 minutes followed by a respectful dismissal. As her turn approached, Sarah's confidence grew rather than wavered. She had always performed best under pressure, and something told her that this interview would be different from any evaluation she had faced before. The general was looking for more than just technical competence. He was searching for a specific type of person, someone who could handle not just the physical demands of the mission, but the psychological weight of what they were about to undertake. When her name was finally called, Sarah walked across the gymnasium floor with measured steps. The general stood waiting by the office door, his piercing blue eyes studying her approach. This was her moment to prove that she belonged among the military's elite, that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As she reached the office door, she could feel the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. But instead of feeling burdened, she felt energized and ready. The office was smaller than Sarah had expected, containing only a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a map of the target region pinned to the wall. General Hayes gestured for her to sit while he remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. The silence stretched for several moments as he studied her personnel file, though Sarah suspected he already knew every detail by heart. "Tell me about Afghanistan," the general said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. Sarah's pulse quickened. Her deployment to Afghanistan had been classified at the highest levels, and very few people knew the details of what had happened during her final mission there. 2 years ago, Sarah had been part of a reconnaissance unit flying dangerous missions over Taliban territory. During one particular operation, her aircraft had suffered critical engine failure while deep in enemy airspace. Most pilots would have followed protocol and attempted to reach friendly territory, but Sarah had made a split-second decision that saved lives and changed everything. Instead of turning back, she had used her crippled aircraft to provide cover for a ground unit that was under heavy fire. Flying on a single engine at dangerously low altitude, she had drawn enemy fire away from the trapped soldiers while coordinating their extraction. The maneuver should have been impossible, but somehow she had made it work. "Sir, we completed the mission objectives," Sarah replied carefully, unsure how much detail the general wanted. She had learned that with superior officers, it was often better to let them guide the conversation rather than volunteering too much information. The general finally looked up from the file, his eyes meeting hers directly. "You saved 8 lives that day by breaking every rule in the book. Your commanding officer recommended you for a court-martial. I recommended you for a medal. Care to explain the difference in our perspectives?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had never known that General Hayes had been involved in the aftermath of that mission. The investigation that followed had been thorough and uncomfortable, with some officers arguing that her actions had been reckless while others called them heroic. "Sir, the ground unit was taking heavy casualties. Standard protocol would have meant leaving them exposed for another 20 minutes while backup arrived. I assessed the situation and determined that my aircraft could provide effective cover despite the engine damage." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Sometimes the book doesn't account for every variable in a combat situation. The general nodded slowly, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And sometimes young pilots think they know better than decades of military doctrine." His tone wasn't accusatory, but rather seemed to be testing her reaction. "What made you so confident in your assessment?" This was the question Sarah had dreaded during the investigation. How could she explain the instinct that had guided her decision? How could she describe the clarity she felt in moments of crisis? The way complex situations seemed to simplify themselves in her mind, when lives hung in the balance. "Sir, I had complete situational awareness of the battlefield. I could see the enemy positions, the friendly positions, and the terrain features that would affect the engagement. The math was clear. My aircraft could absorb the enemy fire and survive long enough for extraction, but only if I acted immediately. The general walked to the map on the wall, pointing to a mountainous region marked with red circles. This mission will require the same kind of unconventional thinking. We're not dealing with a textbook scenario. He turned back to face her. But this time there won't be any investigation afterwards. Success or failure will be measured in lives saved. Period. Sarah studied the map, noting the elevation changes and the limited approach routes to the target compound. The terrain was even more challenging than Afghanistan, with narrow valleys that would force aircraft into predictable flight paths. Any rescue attempt would require precise timing and the ability to adapt quickly as conditions changed. What's your assessment of the target area? The general asked, watching her examine the map. Limited ingress and egress routes, Sarah replied immediately. The mountains create natural choke points that enemy forces will likely monitor. Weather could change quickly at that altitude, affecting visibility and aircraft performance. Any approach will need multiple contingency plans. The general's expression grew more interested. And if you had to choose a primary approach route? Sarah studied the map more carefully, considering factors that most pilots might overlook. She noticed a dry riverbed that wound through the valley, providing a low-altitude corridor that might avoid radar detection. The approach would be dangerous, requiring precise navigation and split-second timing, but it could work. The riverbed approach from the southeast, she said, tracing the route with her finger. It's risky because there's no room for error, but it offers the best chance of achieving surprise. The mountains would mask our approach until we're almost on top of the compound. The general's smile widened slightly. That's the same route I selected. He returned to his chair, leaning back and studying her with renewed interest. Your file mentions that other pilots have given you a nickname. Care to share what that is? Sarah hesitated. The nickname had started as a joke among her squadron mates, but it had stuck because of her ability to appear and disappear during training exercises. She wasn't sure how a senior officer would react to what some might consider an unprofessional designation. They call me Ghost, sir. It started during electronic warfare training when I managed to avoid radar detection longer than expected. She kept her explanation simple, not mentioning how the nickname had evolved to encompass her entire approach to flying. Ghost, the general repeated thoughtfully. Interesting. But nicknames are for training exercises and casual conversation. Real missions require real call signs. He stood up again, moving to the window that overlooked the flight line where aircraft sat ready for deployment. This mission will involve multiple aircraft and complex coordination. Each pilot will need a call sign that reflects their role and capabilities. He turned back to Sarah, his expression serious. If you're selected for this mission, your call sign will be Specter 6. Do you know what that means? Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Specter call signs were reserved for the most elite special operations flights. They indicated pilots who operated in the shadows, completing missions that officially never happened. Being assigned a Specter designation meant joining a very select group of aviators who had proven themselves under the most extreme conditions. Sir, Specter call signs are used for, she began, but the general cut her off with a raised hand. I know what they're used for. The question is whether you're ready for what that designation entails. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Specter 6 would be the lead pilot for this mission. Everything would depend on your ability to execute under pressure. Are you prepared for that responsibility? The magnitude of what he was offering hit Sarah like a physical force. Lead pilot on a classified rescue mission, with a Specter designation that would mark her as one of the military's most trusted aviators. It was everything she had trained for, everything she had dreamed of achieving in her career. But with the honor came enormous pressure. As Specter 6, she would be responsible not just for her own performance, but for the lives of the hostages, her fellow pilots, and the success of the entire operation. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, could result in catastrophic failure. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling around her like armor. The general's question hung in the air between them, demanding not just an answer, but a commitment that would define the rest of her military career. She looked directly into his eyes, seeing decades of command decisions and the burden of responsibility that came with sending young people into harm's way. Sir, I'm ready, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I understand what Specter 6 represents, and I won't let you down. The general studied her for a long moment before nodding. The briefing for selected personnel begins at 0600 hours tomorrow. You'll receive your mission packet tonight. Everything from this point forward is classified at the highest levels. He moved to the door, then paused. Miss Chen, there's something else you should know about this mission. Sarah waited, sensing that whatever came next would be crucial to understanding what she was about to undertake. The general's expression had shifted, becoming more personal than official. The hostages include Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a medical researcher who was working on a vaccine distribution program in the region. She's also my daughter. The words hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just another rescue mission. It was deeply personal for the man who would be commanding the operation. Sir, Sarah began, but the general raised his hand. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know the full scope of what we're facing. My personal connection to this mission doesn't change the operational parameters, but it does mean that failure isn't just a military setback. It's personal. His voice remained controlled, but Sarah could see the pain behind his professional facade. The revelation changed everything. Sarah now understood why the general had taken such personal interest in pilot selection, why every detail of this mission mattered so intensely to him. She also realized that her performance as Specter 6 would be scrutinized not just by military command, but by a father desperate to bring his daughter home. General Hayes, you have my word that we'll bring Dr. Morrison and all the hostages home safely, Sarah said, meaning every word. The general's slight nod told her that he believed her, which only increased the pressure she felt. After leaving the interview, Sarah walked across the base in a daze. The autumn air was crisp, and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but she felt fundamentally changed. She was no longer just another pilot. She was Specter 6, chosen to lead one of the most critical missions of her career. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters reviewing the mission packet that had been delivered by a courier. The intelligence was sobering. The compound was heavily fortified, with multiple guard positions and sophisticated surveillance equipment. The hostages were being held in a central building that offered limited access points for a rescue team. The mission timeline was tight. Intelligence suggested that the militants were planning to move the hostages within 72 hours, possibly to a location where rescue would be impossible. This meant that the operation had to succeed on the first attempt. There would be no second chances. Sarah studied the photographs of the target area, memorizing every detail of the terrain, the buildings, and the defensive positions. She practiced the flight route in her mind, visualizing every turn, every altitude change, every potential obstacle. By the time she finally tried to sleep, she could navigate the entire mission profile with her eyes closed. The next morning's briefing took place in a secure conference room deep within the base's command center. Sarah arrived early, finding herself alone with maps, satellite images, and technical specifications spread across multiple tables. She used the time to review the latest intelligence updates and weather forecasts. Other team members began arriving precisely at 0600 hours. Sarah recognized some faces from previous missions, but others were new to her. There was Captain James Morrison, a special forces operator who would lead the ground assault team. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Williams would serve as mission coordinator. Major David Kim would pilot the backup aircraft designated as Specter 7. As the team assembled, Sarah noticed the mix of excitement and tension in the room. Everyone present understood the significance of what they were about to undertake. These were the military's elite personnel, chosen for their exceptional skills and proven ability to perform under extreme pressure. General Hayes entered the room at exactly 0600, followed by intelligence officers carrying additional briefing materials. The informal conversation stopped immediately as everyone came to attention. The general's presence commanded absolute focus from every person in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Operation Silent Thunder, the general began, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. What you'll hear in this room will determine the success or failure of a mission that cannot fail. The detailed briefing revealed the complexity of what they faced. The militants holding the hostages were well trained and heavily armed. They had chosen their location carefully, taking advantage of natural defenses and establishing multiple fallback positions. Intelligence suggested they were prepared for a rescue attempt and had threatened to kill the hostages if they detected any military activity in the area. Sarah listened intently as the operational plan unfolded. The mission would require precise coordination between air and ground forces. Specter 6 would lead the initial approach, providing cover for the insertion of the ground team. Once the hostages were secured, both aircraft would extract the entire team under potentially heavy fire. The margin for error was essentially zero. Any deviation from the planned timeline could result in the hostages being moved or killed. Weather conditions had to be perfect, equipment had to function flawlessly, and every team member had to execute their role with absolute precision. As the briefing continued, Sarah found herself studying General Hayes's face whenever the discussion touched on the hostages. His professional composure never wavered, but she could see the personal stakes in his eyes. This wasn't just a commanding officer planning a mission. This was a father trying to save his daughter. The technical aspects of the flight plan were challenging but manageable. Sarah would be flying a modified aircraft equipped with advanced navigation and communication systems. The route would take them through mountain passes at extremely low altitude, requiring precise navigation and split-second timing to avoid detection. Major Kim, as Specter 7, would follow a parallel route and serve as backup for both insertion and extraction phases. His aircraft would carry additional equipment and ammunition, ready to provide support if the primary mission encountered complications. Captain Morrison's ground team would have only minutes to locate and secure the hostages once they reached the compound. They had studied floor plans and practiced the assault sequence repeatedly, but the reality of the situation would likely present unexpected challenges. As the briefing concluded, General Hayes announced that they would depart at 2100 hours that evening. This gave them the entire day for final preparations, equipment checks, and mental preparation for what lay ahead. Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission calm settling over her, the focused clarity that always preceded her best performances. Walking back to her quarters, Sarah reflected on how quickly her life had changed. 24 hours ago, she had been just another skilled pilot, hoping for an opportunity to prove herself. Now she was Specter 6, leading a mission that would test every skill she had developed during her military career. The hours before departure passed in a blur of final preparations. Sarah spent the afternoon in the flight simulator, running through the mission profile repeatedly until every maneuver became instinctive. The simulator couldn't replicate the real-world pressure she would face, but it helped her visualize the challenging terrain and tight timing requirements. At 1800 hours, the entire team gathered for a final mission briefing. Intelligence had provided updated satellite images showing increased activity around the compound. The militants appeared to be preparing for something, possibly the threatened relocation of the hostages. This new information compressed their already tight timeline even further. Weather conditions are optimal, reported the meteorologist. Clear skies, minimal wind, and good visibility. However, there's a storm system moving in from the west that could affect extraction if the mission runs long. Sarah nodded, filing this information away with all the other variables she would need to monitor during the flight. General Hayes addressed the team one final time before they dispersed to collect their gear. Each of you was chosen because you represent the best of what our military has to offer. The hostages are counting on your skills, your training, and your commitment to bringing them home safely. His eyes met Sarah's briefly, and she saw both confidence and the weight of personal stakes in his gaze. The flight line was a hub of controlled activity as ground crews performed final checks on both aircraft. Sarah walked around her plane methodically, inspecting every system and component that would be critical to mission success. The aircraft was a marvel of military engineering, equipped with advanced stealth capabilities and navigation systems that would help them avoid detection. Major Kim approached as she completed her pre-flight inspection. "It's an honor to fly with you on this one, Specter 6, he said, using her operational call sign for the first time. The formality of it reminded Sarah that she was no longer just Sarah Chen. She was the mission commander, responsible for decisions that would determine success or failure. "The honor is mutual, Specter 7, she replied, falling naturally into the professional dynamic that would govern their interactions during the mission. "Remember, Communication discipline will be critical once we enter hostile airspace. Standard protocols unless we encounter unexpected complications. As 2100 hours approached, both flight crews completed their final briefings and gear checks. Sarah strapped herself into the pilot's seat, running through the startup sequence that had become second nature through years of training and experience. The familiar hum of systems coming online provided a comforting backdrop as she prepared for what would likely be the most important mission of her career. Specter 6, this is Control. You are cleared for takeoff, came the voice over her radio. Sarah acknowledged the clearance and began her taxi to the runway. Through her canopy, she could see Specter 7 following at the prescribed distance, ready to execute their parallel approach routes. The takeoff was smooth, and both aircraft climbed rapidly into the darkening sky. Once they reached cruising altitude, Sarah settled into the focused mental state that had served her well in previous combat situations. All the preparation, all the briefings, all the anxiety about the mission's importance faded away, leaving only the immediate task of flying her aircraft safely to the target area. The flight to hostile airspace took 2 hours, during which Sarah maintained constant communication with Specter 7 and monitored updates from intelligence sources. The compound remained active, with guards visible at their posts and lights, indicating continued occupancy of the building where the hostages were believed to be held. As they approached the initial waypoint for their descent into the mountain valley, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that always preceded combat operations. This was the moment when theoretical planning met real-world execution, when all their preparation would be tested against the unpredictable realities of the battlefield. Specter 7, this is Specter 6. Beginning descent to attack altitude. Maintain radio silence from this point unless emergency. Major Kim's acknowledgement was brief and professional, confirming that both pilots understood the critical phase they were entering. Sarah began the descent that would take them below radar coverage, following the predetermined route through mountain passes that had been selected for their concealment properties. The terrain was challenging, requiring constant attention to navigation and altitude as she threaded the aircraft between peaks that rose on both sides of their flight path. The riverbed approach she had identified during her briefing with General Hayes proved to be even more demanding than anticipated. Flying at extremely low altitude in near-total darkness, Sarah relied on night vision equipment and instrument navigation to maintain the precise course required for mission success. Any deviation could result in ground impact or detection by enemy surveillance equipment. As they neared the target area, Sarah could see lights from the compound ahead. Intelligence had been accurate. The facility was clearly occupied and showed signs of heightened security. Guard positions were visible around the perimeter, and vehicles were staged near the main building in positions that suggested the militants were prepared for trouble. Ground team, this is Specter 6. Target area in sight. Beginning final approach for insertion. Captain Morrison's response confirmed that his assault team was ready for immediate deployment once they reached the designated landing zone. The landing zone was a small clearing approximately half a mile from the compound, chosen because it offered concealment while remaining close enough for the ground team to reach their target quickly. Sarah had practiced the approach dozens of times in simulation, but the real terrain presented challenges that no computer program could fully replicate. As she maneuvered the aircraft into position for insertion, Sarah caught sight of movement near the compound that hadn't been visible in the intelligence photos. Additional guards were positioned along the approaches to the facility, and what appeared to be heavy weapons were visible at several locations. Specter 6 to all units. Be advised we have additional defensive positions not shown in intelligence briefings. Recommend increased caution during assault phase. She kept her voice calm and professional, but internally she was recalculating the mission variables based on this new information. The insertion itself went smoothly, with Captain Morrison's team disappearing into the darkness within seconds of touching the ground. Sarah immediately repositioned her aircraft to the overwatch position, where she would provide air support and monitor communications from the assault team. Ground team to Specter 6, we are moving to target. Estimated time to breach is 8 minutes. Morrison's voice was barely audible over the encrypted radio channel, maintaining the communication discipline that was essential for operational security. Sarah monitored her instruments and scanned the surrounding area for any signs that their presence had been detected. So far, the mission was proceeding according to plan, but she knew that the most dangerous phase was just beginning. Once the ground team breached the compound, they would have only minutes to locate and secure the hostages before enemy forces could respond. Specter 7, this is Specter 6. Maintain station at extraction point. Ground team is proceeding to target. Major Kim's acknowledgement confirmed that he was ready to move into position for the extraction phase once the hostages were secured. As she waited for updates from the ground team, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just 48 hours. She had gone from being an unknown pilot to commanding a critical rescue mission that would define not just her career, but potentially save the lives of innocent people, including the general's daughter. The 8 minutes stretched like hours as Sarah maintained her overwatch position, scanning for any signs of enemy activity while monitoring communications from the ground team. Through her night vision equipment, she could see the compound laid out below, its defensive positions now clearly visible in the darkness. The additional guards she had spotted earlier were maintaining their posts, apparently unaware that a rescue operation was underway. Ground team to Specter 6, we are at the perimeter, initiating breach in 30 seconds. Captain Morrison's voice carried the tension of a man about to lead his team into extreme danger. Sarah acknowledged his transmission and prepared to provide immediate support if the situation deteriorated. The sound of the breach was barely audible from her position, but Sarah saw the flash of explosives as the ground team created their entry point. Immediately, lights began coming on throughout the compound as guards reacted to the unexpected assault. The element of surprise had been maintained long enough to get the team inside, but now the clock was ticking faster than ever. Contact. Enemy forces responding from the east building. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio as the situation on the ground became chaotic. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from several positions as the militants began returning fire on the assault team. Without hesitation, Sarah maneuvered her aircraft into a position where she could provide covering fire for the ground team. The weapon systems on her aircraft were designed for precision strikes, and she used them now to suppress enemy positions that threatened Morrison's advance toward the hostage location. Specter 6 engaging enemy positions. Ground team, you have a clear path to the main building. Sarah's training took over as she coordinated her air support with the ground assault, using her elevated position to identify threats that the team couldn't see from ground level. The battle intensified as more militants emerged from concealed positions throughout the compound. Sarah realized that intelligence estimates had significantly underestimated the number of defenders present. Instead of facing a small group of guards, Morrison's team was engaging a well-organized force that had prepared for exactly this type of rescue attempt. Specter 7, this is Specter 6. We need immediate support at the target location. Enemy resistance is heavier than anticipated. Sarah called for backup while continuing to provide covering fire for the ground team's advance. Major Kim's response was immediate. Specter 7 inbound. ETA 2 minutes. Sarah felt a surge of relief knowing that additional firepower was en route, but 2 minutes could be an eternity in a firefight. Ground team to Specter 6, we have visual on the hostages. They're alive and mobile. Morrison's transmission provided the first piece of genuinely good news since the mission began. The hostages were not only alive, but apparently capable of moving under their own power, which would significantly simplify the extraction process. Sarah continued engaging enemy positions while monitoring the ground team's progress. Through her targeting systems, she could see Morrison's team moving through the compound with professional efficiency, but they were taking fire from multiple directions. The militants had clearly prepared for a rescue attempt and were executing their own defensive plan. Hostages secured. Moving to extraction point. Morrison's voice carried a note of triumph, but Sarah knew the most dangerous part of the mission was just beginning. Getting into the compound had been challenging, but getting out while protecting 7 hostages would test every skill the team possessed. As the ground team began moving toward the extraction point, Sarah noticed new movement on the roads leading to the compound. Vehicle headlights were approaching from multiple directions, indicating that reinforcements were arriving to support the militants. The extraction window was closing rapidly. All units, be advised, we have enemy reinforcements approaching from the south and west. Estimated arrival time 4 minutes. Sarah's warning prompted an immediate response from both Morrison and Major Kim. who began adjusting their plans to account for this new threat. The extraction point was a small clearing approximately 800 meters from the compound, chosen because it offered enough space for helicopter operations, while providing some concealment from enemy observation. As Morrison's team approached the area, Sarah moved into position to provide overwatch for the pickup. Specter 7 in position for extraction. Ground team, guide on my position. Major Kim's aircraft appeared through the darkness, its navigation lights barely visible as it approached the landing zone. Sarah continued engaging enemy positions that threatened the extraction, her ammunition running lower with each engagement. The extraction itself was a masterpiece of military precision. Major Kim brought his aircraft into the small clearing with remarkable skill, touching down just long enough for Morrison's team and all 7 hostages to board. Through her targeting systems, Sarah could see the faces of the people they had come to rescue, including a woman she recognized from intelligence photos as Dr. Elizabeth Morrison. The general's daughter. Extraction complete. All hostages aboard and accounted for. Morrison's transmission marked the successful completion of their primary objective, but Sarah knew they weren't safe yet. Enemy reinforcements were still approaching, and both aircraft would need to navigate back through the mountain passes while potentially under fire. As Specter 7 lifted off with its precious cargo, Sarah took position as escort, ready to defend the extraction aircraft against any threats during their escape route. The enemy reinforcements had reached the compound and were setting up heavy weapons that could threaten both aircraft if they remained in the area much longer. Specter 6 to control. Mission successful. 7 hostages recovered and en route to friendly territory. Sarah's transmission to base command would be welcome news for everyone monitoring the operation, especially General Hayes, who was waiting to learn the fate of his daughter. The flight home was tense but uneventful. Sarah maintained constant vigilance while escorting Specter 7 through the mountain passes and back into friendly airspace. The storm system that had been approaching earlier was now clearly visible on the horizon, confirming that their timing had been critical for mission success. As they approached their home base, Sarah felt the adrenaline of combat beginning to fade, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment. They had successfully rescued 7 innocent people from a heavily defended compound, completing a mission that had seemed nearly impossible during the planning phase. Specter 6, this is Control. Outstanding work out there. General Hayes is waiting to debrief you personally upon landing. The controller's words reminded Sarah that while the operational phase of the mission was complete, she would soon face the most important conversation of her military career. Landing at base felt surreal after everything that had happened. Ground crews immediately surrounded Specter 7 to assist with the hostage medical evaluations, while Sarah completed her post-flight procedures with the methodical care that had become second nature through years of training. As she shut down her aircraft systems, Sarah reflected on the events of the past few days. She had gone from being an unknown pilot to successfully commanding one of the most critical rescue missions in recent military history. The designation Specter 6 no longer felt like an honor she had to earn. It felt like a responsibility she had proven herself capable of handling. Walking across the flight line toward the debriefing area, Sarah saw General Hayes waiting near the command building. General Hayes stood motionless near the command building, his silhouette backlit by the facility's security lights. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the tension in his posture as he waited for confirmation that his daughter was truly safe. The weight of command had always been visible in his bearing, but tonight it seemed heavier, more personal than Sarah had ever witnessed. As she approached, the general's aide whispered something in his ear, and Sarah saw his shoulders relax slightly. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison had been taken directly to the base medical facility for evaluation, but preliminary reports indicated that all hostages were in remarkably good condition considering their ordeal. Specter 6, the general said as Sarah came to attention before him. His voice carried the same authority she remembered from their first meeting, but there was something different now, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Outstanding mission execution. Your tactical decisions under pressure were exactly what this operation required. Sarah felt a surge of pride at his words, but she remained focused on the professional aspects of their interaction. Thank you, sir. The entire team performed exceptionally. Major Kim's extraction work was flawless, and Captain Morrison's ground team exceeded all expectations despite facing heavier resistance than anticipated. The general nodded, but his attention seemed divided between the debrief and something more personal. I've read the preliminary after-action reports. Your decision to call for early support when you identified additional defensive positions likely prevented casualties. That kind of tactical awareness is exactly why you were chosen for this mission. Before Sarah could respond, a medical technician approached and spoke quietly to the general. Sarah watched his face transform as he received what was obviously good news about his daughter's condition. The professional mask he had maintained throughout the entire operation finally slipped, revealing the relief of a father whose child had been returned safely. "Sir, if I may," Sarah said carefully. Dr. Morrison showed remarkable composure during the extraction. She helped keep the other hostages calm and followed all instructions perfectly. Her actions contributed significantly to the mission's success. The general's smile was genuine now, free from the weight of command responsibility that had defined their previous interactions. She's always been strong under pressure. Gets that from her mother. He paused, seeming to remember that they were still conducting an official debrief. But that's a conversation for another time. The formal debriefing took place in the same secure conference room where Sarah had received her initial mission briefing just days earlier. The entire team was present, along with intelligence officers and senior command staff who would analyze every aspect of the operation for future reference. Sarah provided a detailed account of the flight operations, tactical decisions, and lessons learned from the mission. Her recommendations included updates to intelligence gathering procedures and modifications, to extraction protocols, based on the unexpected level of resistance they had encountered. Captain Morrison's ground team had performed flawlessly despite facing nearly twice as many defenders as intelligence had suggested. His tactical adaptations during the assault phase had kept casualties to zero, while successfully securing all hostages within the planned time frame. Major Kim's extraction flying had been masterful, bringing his aircraft into an impossibly small landing zone under combat conditions and departing with 7 additional passengers without incident. His precise coordination with the ground team had made a difficult extraction look routine. As the formal debrief concluded, General Hayes announced that all team members would be recommended for commendations recognizing their exceptional performance. For Sarah, this meant that her designation as Specter 6 would become permanent, marking her as one of the military's most elite pilots. Later that evening, Sarah found herself in the base officers' club, quietly celebrating with Major Kim and other team members. The mission's success felt surreal after the intensity of the past few days. She had gone from being a skilled but relatively unknown pilot to leading one of the year's most successful special operations. The conversation inevitably turned to future assignments and the opportunities that would likely follow from their performance on Operation Silent Thunder. Sarah realized that her military career had fundamentally changed course. She would no longer be just another pilot in the squadron. She was now part of an elite group called upon for the military's most critical missions. 3 weeks later, Sarah received orders for her next assignment. She would be joining a special operations wing that conducted classified missions around the world. The posting came with a promotion and recognition. As one of the youngest pilots ever to achieve permanent Specter designation, the ceremony where she received her commendation took place in the same gymnasium where General Hayes had first addressed the assembled pilots. As he presented her medal, the general spoke about the qualities that defined exceptional military leadership: calm under pressure, tactical innovation, and unwavering commitment to mission success. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Hayes announced to the assembled crowd, "it gives me great pleasure to present the Distinguished Flying Cross to Captain Sarah Chen, call sign Specter 6, for extraordinary achievement in aerial flight during a classified special operations mission." As Sarah stood at attention receiving her medal, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The shy young woman who had dreamed of flying had become a pilot, trusted with the military's most critical missions. The nickname Ghost had evolved into something far more significant, a call sign that represented the highest levels of military aviation. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison attended the ceremony, having recovered fully from her ordeal. She approached Sarah afterward, extending her hand in gratitude. "Thank you for bringing us home," she said simply. "My father told me about your role in planning and executing the rescue. We owe you our lives." Sarah accepted the gratitude gracefully, But she knew the mission's success had been the result of teamwork, training, and the kind of military precision that came from years of preparation. She had been honored to lead the operation, but every member of the team had contributed to its success. General Hayes appeared beside his daughter, his face showing the peace that came from having his family safely restored. "Captain Chen," he said formally, then smiled. "Sarah, I have one more question for you." Sarah waited, wondering what final evaluation or assessment the general might have for her performance. "Your call sign," he said, his voice carrying the same authority she remembered from their first meeting, but tempered now with respect and admiration. "When people ask about Specter 6, when they want to know who leads our most critical missions, when they need to know they can count on someone to bring our people home, what will you tell them?" Sarah stood straighter, feeling the weight of her new designation and all it represented. She thought about the responsibility she had accepted, the trust that had been placed in her, and the missions that lay ahead. The answer came to her clearly, carrying the confidence she had earned through successful completion of an impossible task. "I'll tell them," she said, her voice steady and sure, "that Specter 6 is ready for whatever comes next." The general's nod of approval told her everything she needed to know. She had not only completed a successful mission, but had proven herself worthy of the trust placed in her. The call sign Specter 6 was no longer just a designation. It was an identity she had earned through skill, courage, and unwavering commitment to bringing people home safely. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Sarah looked up at the sky visible through the gymnasium windows. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to serve. But tonight she was simply grateful to be Specter 6, ready to answer whatever call might come.